And so you can jump in and out of the Study Assist website at any point. And because of the way we've kind of got the navigation across the top, there's some very specific headings about, starting study or looking at, loan application, what type of loans are there. I think depending on where you are in your study journey, there's a great entry point into Study Assist to get some more information.
G'day and welcome to the Choosing Your Uni podcast. I'm your host, Rob Malicki, coming today from Garigal Land in Sydney. And in Australia, we're fortunate to have one of the strongest higher education systems in the whole world. According to the global rankings organisation QS, Australia's higher education system, our university system, ranks third behind only the UK and the USA. But some 90% of our universities rank in the top 1,000 globally, meaning regardless of where you go to uni in Australia, you're going to get an extremely good education by world standards. Now, Australia's system is successful for many reasons, but one of the key reasons, I believe, is that for more than 50 years, Australian governments of all colours have supported this critical part of Australia's education system. Unlike some other countries in the world, a key tenet, a key part of that approach has been ensuring that if an Australian wants to go to university, they can go to university. And that's what we're talking about on the Choosing Your Uni podcast today. Different programs available from the Australian government to help people to pay for the cost of their studies. And to help me break this down, what's available and how it works, I'm joined by Nicole from the Federal Department of Education. Nicole, thanks for joining me on the Choosing Your Uni podcast.
Hi, Rob. Great to be here.
Now, Nicole, there are lots of acronyms when it comes to universities and university support, but perhaps we can start with the main acronym that students and their parents are likely to come across when they start looking at university, and that is CSP. What is a CSP, and one go about getting one of these?
The long version of CSP is a Commonwealth-supported place. So essentially, it's a government subsidy which is provided to students, which means that they don't pay the full course fees. So this is not a loan and it doesn't have to be paid back. The government is literally paying a portion of the course fees on your behalf, and then there is a remaining portion which a student has to pay themselves, and that's called the student contribution amount.
I'm glad you cleared that up right out of the gate, because I think it's one of those things that people don't understand, is that the government actually spends billions and billions of dollars every year that nobody pays back. Well, the Australian taxpayer, I suppose, eventually pays for that, but that's not actually borne by the student, and that's what the CSP is.
Just to give you a bit of an idea about what that subsidy might look like, and these are based on some real-life examples from university websites, so you can obviously go and do your own research as well if you're a student. But if you wanted to study a law degree, for example, and you receive a Commonwealth-supported place, then the cost of that law degree for the first year might be $16,000. If you're not in a Commonwealth-supported place, so you don't have a CSP or a full fee-paying student, then it might be $34,000. And there's some examples on the studyassist.gov.au website which also shows the difference in cost between studying a CSP and studying not in a CSP.
Fantastic. And I'm looking forward to chatting more about Study Assist a little bit later in the podcast. And that's a great example. I think people really should go out and have a look at that sort of information, because it really starts to highlight to you the really generous level of support that Australians do get when they go to university. So I think that's extremely valuable. Nicole, you mentioned a student contribution. Maybe could we unpack that a little bit, and then perhaps we can talk a little bit about the HELP program, another acronym.
So the student contribution amount is the amount that's left to pay. So the government's paid the subsidy and then you've got an amount left to pay. You can either pay that up front to your university, and you have to do that before the census date. And a census date is a really important sort of legal deadline, and we can talk about that hopefully a little bit later. But you either pay up front to the university by that date, or you have to apply for a loan, and that's called the Higher Education Loan Program. Most of your listeners will probably know that as a HELP loan, and we'll discuss that a little bit more. But in terms of the student contributions, the government puts the different subjects into different bands or different clusters, and there's a table of those. And so we'll basically say if you're studying in a certain subject, say you're doing a Bachelor of Education, then there'll be some of the units that you study will be in the education cluster, which is funding cluster 2, I think, for example. But you might also do some science and some maths and some English. And so those subjects will be in different clusters, and that will determine really what the cost of a course is. But because you're getting a subsidy from the government, then and you're enrolled in a CSP, there's a cap or a maximum that a university can charge for those units. And so that's all listed, and it has to be published on the university's website.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because one of the questions we regularly get at Choosing Your Uni is, well, how much is my degree going to cost? And it's a little bit complicated to answer because, of course, if you're doing a particular degree, like, the science degree is a great example because you might take an elective engineering or in music or something like that. And each of those individual subjects falls under a different grouping, and therefore the individual cost of that subject will vary. Actually, one thing I might just ask, which is also something we hear a lot, if you're doing, for example, an education degree, that was the one you kind of pulled out as an example, so let's stick with that. But if you do that education degree at Macquarie University or the University of Western Australia, is there, outside of that variability in sort of individual subjects, that degree should essentially cost the same. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if you're enrolled in a CSP and the funding clusters for those subjects, there's a maximum of what can be charged. A university could charge less than that for a subject, but mostly they'd be on a par with each other. So yes, but if you're a full fee paying student, you don't have a CSP, say you're an international student, then it's about the cost of delivery, and different universities will obviously charge different prices.
Yeah, I think that's quite funny that the word help has just come into that because, of course, the higher education loan program, HELP program, is a big part of what we're about to talk about. Back in my generation, we used to know this just simply as HECS, the Higher Education Contribution Scheme, but of course that was updated actually quite a long time ago now, and now it's the HELP program that has a number of different elements to it. Perhaps you can walk us through some of those elements, Nicole.
Sure, Rob. Essentially, there are 5 types of help loans. Most people would be most familiar with HECS help, and the other type of loan that would probably be the second most taken out loan, if I can say that, is the fee help loan. So essentially both of those loans are around being able to pay your course fees. HECS help is a loan that you would take out if you're eligible for a CSP and if you're not enrolled in a CSP. So if you don't go to a public university, for example, you're doing your undergraduate degree, a bachelor degree at a private institution, a private college, then you may not be entitled to a CSP, and then you would take out a fee help loan to cover the cost of the course. There are a couple of other loans which I'll just talk about briefly. One is an OS help loan, and so that's if you're doing a degree where you want to do an exchange overseas, something really exciting like that, but you think, I can't really afford, the cost of living overseas for a semester, for example, then you can take out an OS help loan and get some money for your sort of travel accommodation expenses. And there's also an SA help loan, which is a more common loan, and that's to cover your student services and amenities fee. So universities can charge this fee up to about $350 a year, and that's to provide things like, childcare services, food services, career counselling, those sorts of things. And on top of your course fees, but there's a loan if you need assistance being able to pay that.
So that's 4, and I believe there's one more.
There's the startup help loan. So it's in its pilot year, so it's fairly early on, but it's a bit more of a niche loan. So if you're a postgraduate student or if you're in your last year of uni or you've recently graduated and you want to do a course that is called an accelerator program, so this is sort of entrepreneurial skills, innovation skills for a startup business, there's a help loan to assist you to pay your course fees for that as well.
Fantastic. So what I heard you say, just to jump into those 2 main areas, the HECS help and the fee help, what I heard you say is, essentially we're paying these back, but if you're taking a HECS help loan, that's when you're a Commonwealth supported student, so the government is paying part of your studies and you're able to defer the rest, the amount that you need to pay as a student, you can defer that and then pay that back later. Fee help is for students who aren't Commonwealth supported, so the government isn't subsidising part of that course. And that's where you defer the full cost of your fees and eventually you pay that back later as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And with the fee help loan, just to be conscious that there is a 20% loan fee on that as well. So that's something else to think about when you're doing your research about, where you want to study, whether it's a public university, whether it's a private institution, and the loans that you might be eligible.
Okay, good to know. I just put a little caveat in there for anyone listening along here. Obviously, details can change. Always good to go and double check things. So the Study Assist website's the best place to go and check out. Startup Help is in a pilot year. I really like the look of that program. I think that's a really clever thing to have launched. So hopefully that continues, but it might not. So always look into the details. Studyassists.gov.au is the best place to go and do that. Maybe let's talk a little bit about then who's eligible for these Commonwealth supported places and for the help programs.
So look, there is quite a lot of information around eligibility, and there's some sort of general eligibility and then there's some more specific depending on the help loan. So I would encourage, again, people to go to studyassist.gov.au and they can have a look at the full list. But essentially it comes down to citizenship and residency. So Australian citizens are eligible for both a CSP and a help loan. And then there are some other categories that are eligible for a CSP. So, for example, if you're a New Zealand citizen, if you're a Pacific Engagement visa holder or a permanent resident, you're entitled to the CSP. but not necessarily entitled to the help loan. So there's sort of some stricter criteria there. There are other things that you need to, so obviously you need to be studying with a registered Australian higher education provider like a university. You need to have a USI, which is a unique student identifier number that students will get when they enrol, TFN, a tax file number for a help loan, those sorts of things. But the essential criteria really are probably down to citizenship and residency.
Now, once again, this might sound a little bit scary to some people who are getting into this for the first time. As someone who's been through the system, a lot of people speak to that. It's actually really easy to take care of some of this administration. The USI is really, really easy to take care of. A tax file number is the same. So these are just sort of administrative steps you need to go through, but it's not a daunting process, if I could put it that way.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that it's probably useful to say here is the loan's not means tested. So it doesn't matter whether you're earning money at the moment, working part-time, whether you're, depending on how much your parents are earning, eligibility criteria, it's not about income at this point.
That's a really good point. And maybe just a little bit of history. I'll take a little side door there. The HEX program, which is now the HELP program, came about in the late 1980s. And the Australian government had done research around the fact that graduates with a degree make a lot more money over their lifetime than those without a degree. And I actually looked up the recent statistics around that. So as at time of recording, it still holds very true. Somebody with an undergraduate degree in Australia will earn 53% more than someone without a degree. And someone with a postgraduate degree over the course of their lifetime will earn 75% more on average than someone without a degree. So back in the 80s, the government was looking at, if this individual is getting this huge benefit across their lifetime from higher education, what can we do to make sure that, they're making a contribution to the cost of their education? And there's a chap called Bruce Chapman, who did some of the original design on this. And that was in the 80s. And that's when this whole program sort of kicked off. So there is some really good policy rationale behind why the Australian system is structured that way in order for it to be as fair and equitable as possible. So obviously, really good data around this has been robustly tested over a long period of time and holds true. Those are pretty impressive numbers. What you said about equity is so important. I think in the original design of this program, the question governments have been trying to answer for a long time is how do we make this available to the widest range of students possible, regardless of your background? So even if you're from remote Australia and a low SES background, we still want those people to have access to higher education because it does have lifelong benefits. And so that's a key part of the program design over all of this time, which I believe still holds very true as an observer. Nicole, can we get into some of the administrative steps? So what happens for somebody? How does somebody apply for the HELP program? What's that look like?
As a student, when you apply for a university course, so you might apply directly through a university or you might apply through a tertiary admission centre. So some of your listeners will be familiar with UAC. They might be looking at UAC guides or VTAC, depending on, QTAC, depending on what state you're in. You will then be made an offer from a university, hopefully, if you meet their admission criteria. And it's really careful at that point when you're made an offer. One of the best things to do is check that the offer is for a Commonwealth Supported Place, a CSP, so that you benefit from that government subsidy. And then once you accept the offer with your university, they will provide you with a form. It's called a Commonwealth Assistance Form. It's an online electronic form. And that's what you complete to confirm that you want to accept the CSP. And it's the same form if you're taking out a HEX help loan.
You mentioned just before census dates. To me, that might be a good moment to mention what that is and why it's important.
So look, it's a really important deadline, and we receive hundreds of student inquiries, each week, and a lot of them, especially around census time, are I've missed the census date, or what is the census date? So census date is really important for two reasons. One, it's the very last date, so it's a legal deadline for you to get your form in to get a CSP or a help loan, and it's also the last day that you can withdraw from a course without incurring the cost of that course. So whether that's through a help debt or whether that's to pay the fees up front. So, if you've started in a course and you decide, actually, I don't think this is for me, you need to withdraw before the census date. And you need to do that formally through your university's process. They're the two sort of key things about a census date. Each university will have a different census date. So even though in legislation it says that there needs to be a census date, and it also says it has to be no earlier than 20% through your course, so say you're doing a semester that's 20 weeks long, the census date will be at the end of that first 4 weeks. So you've got 4 weeks to make sure your forms are in, or 4 weeks to withdraw if you don't want to continue. And so even though the census dates are different, your university is legally required to publish those dates. So there'll be sort of a page on the website of your university that says key dates or key, semester dates or term dates. Make sure that's one of the first things that you look at.
I'm going to make a little comment here for the parents who might be listening along here. Obviously, we want our kids to be as independent as they can be through this process. Higher education is that kind of process of, I heard this great expression once, it's like a game of tug of war that you have to lose slowly. As a parent, you say, you're letting the rope out and letting your child be more and more independent. Census date is probably one of those things you want to keep an eye on, at least for the first year or two of your child going into university, because it is a really, really important deadline. And that's definitely one that I would have in my calendar with like 6 different alerts set up, in the weeks leading up to it, just checking in with my child to make sure that they've taken care of what they need to do. Because one of the great things about uni is you can change courses, of course, depending on your degree and your personal circumstances. You can move in and out of things in that period before census date. Census date is like the boom gate coming down and there are no more changes. So put it in your calendar, whatever you do. How much higher education loan program can someone receive?
Yeah, sure. So look, there is a help loan limit, and so that's the maximum amount that you can borrow under the help program.
In your lifetime? I think that's in your lifetime, is that correct?
In your lifetime, yes. But it's a renewable limit. So as you make repayments later down the track when you're earning money, then obviously you can borrow that amount again. So it's about $121,000 for most students, and then there's a higher amount of about $174,000 for students studying dentistry, medicine, or veterinary science. And so they're the amounts this year. They get indexed annually. So there's a website that you can go to. It's myhelpbalance.gov.au, and that will show you how much you have borrowed towards your help loan. It'll list the units that you're studying with your university. So you can keep a track of that, because once you get to the help loan limit, then you won't be able to borrow any more through your help loan. You'll either have to pay up front, or you could take a break from study, for example, until you paid off some of that help debt, which should then renew your balance. There's a really good video that talks about the difference between your help balance and your help debt, and that's on studyassist.gov.au, and that sort of explains a little bit more about help loan limits and what your available balance is, so how much you've got to borrow.
So check out that resource. That sounds great. Out of curiosity, is it possible to swap or change between these different higher education loan programs? So if you start off, for example, on fee help, can you eventually then move onto a Commonwealth supported place?
Yeah, you certainly can. So if you start at an institution that doesn't offer CSP, so it's not a public university, for example, and you do a year of it and then you think, actually, I want to transfer across into a CSP, you can. So you just need to make sure that each time you're applying for the help loan, you need to complete a separate form, and only the university can provide you with that ECAF form that we spoke about earlier. But also make sure that you're withdrawing from, if you're changing courses, you're changing universities or providers, that you're withdrawing from that course and applying again in a new course, particularly, again, if you can, before the census date, so that you're not, being charged for units that you're no longer completing. But yes, and you might have more than one help loan at any given time. So if you're in a CSP and you've got a HEX help loan and you decide to go overseas to do an exchange, you may then apply for an OS help loan. You may have an SA help loan to pay for that student services and amenities fee at the same time as you've got another help loan. So there are a few options there.
And so how's it actually repaid? How's the help loan repaid?
Yeah, so it's repaid through the taxation system, so through the ATO, once you're earning a certain amount. So for this year, it's about $54,000, and it's worked out at tax time. So when you submit your tax return for that year, your tax assessment, they'll determine whether or not you've earned over that $54,000, for example, and a compulsory repayment has to be made. And that's sort of a sliding scale. There's a table on the ATO website, but it's anywhere between about 1% to 10%, depending on how much you're earning. One of the things that's probably important for people to know is that when they graduate from university and they get their first job, to let their employer know that they do have a help debt, because then that money, they're called withholdings, pay-as-you-go withholdings, and they can be held out of your pay slip, essentially, and put aside to be able to make that compulsory repayment when at tax time. That's
critically important to remember, is when you're filling out that paperwork for your employer, to make sure you tick the little box that says you have a help loan, so that money is withheld from your pay. Otherwise, when you put in your tax return, you may end up with a tax bill that you need to pay because it hasn't been sort of withheld from your pay as you go along. So definitely have a close look at that when you're getting employment. And the thing I really like about this system, I mean, I've been in higher education for 25 years and I've seen systems from all over the world, but it really is a fair system in the sense that, if you're straight out of uni, your first job isn't paying particularly well and you don't reach that threshold amount, well, you're not having to pay anything back against your help loan. It's only once you start to earn those higher incomes that you start to then have to make those repayments. And if you start to get a really great salary and make more money, then that amount might increase a little bit as well. But it's all proportionate. And so at no point are you suddenly, find yourself in a situation where maybe you'll lose your job and suddenly you're going to get whacked on the head with a massive bill. Well, if you're not earning that money, then you're not making the repayments. So it's been designed in such a way, I feel, that's really fair. Certainly, there are some education systems around the world where it's definitely not in that model. It's not that fair. So I think we've got the balance pretty right here in Australia. Okay, Nicole, you've mentioned a couple of times, we've been talking about thresholds for repayments, and you've mentioned a few times this word indexation. Could you explain what indexation is?
Yeah, sure. So indexation is when your help debt is adjusted on the 1st of June each year to reflect the changes in cost of living. So this is really to ensure that education maintains its value over time, like other goods and services. So the idea that, the value of $1 today is not the same as 5 years ago or at some point in the future. So indexation on debt doesn't impact when and how much a person repays each year, as this is based on how much a person earns and the compulsory repayment threshold, which we've spoken about. But indexation does mean that the amount you repay in total is likely to be more than the original amount that you borrowed. So indexation is applied by the ATO, any help debts that are older than 11 months. And so at the moment, indexation is calculated against the CPI, Consumer Price Index, but the government has a piece of legislation before Parliament at the moment to change that to be capped at either the lower of the CPI or the wage price index. And really that's so that the indexation will never grow faster than wages. And there's more information on the Study Assist website about that. But what it means is that for students that have a current help debt that has been indexed, they will see a reduction for the last 2 years. So the indexation rate for 2023 was 7.1%, and that's proposed to come down to 3.2%. And for 2024, 4.7%, and that will come down to 4%. And the ATO will apply credit to people's help debt accounts to reflect that lowering of indexation when the legislation passes.
Okay, excellent. So obviously, depending on what time when you're listening to this podcast, information varies. Always jump on the Study Assist website just to make sure that you're up to date with the current information about how indexation is working. That's always going to be up there and available. Maybe you can myth bust for me for a moment, Nicole. One of the things I also commonly hear is like, I'm getting charged interest, like the cost is going up on my degree. But that's very much a myth, isn't it?
Yeah, so there is no real interest in the way that people might think about interest on their credit card or interest for home loans, for example. It is purely indexation. And so the percentage does change each year. And it's only applied once, and it doesn't affect the repayment rate. So unlike somebody with a home loan who, might have to make a higher repayment in the second month if their interest rate goes up, this is an annual process.
We've talked a lot. There's a bit of technical area, isn't it? There's so many things to know. But fortunately, the Study Assist website is a great resource, isn't it? Could you maybe tell me a little bit about Study Assist, Nicole, and the sort of things questions that people can answer off that website?
Look, we're really excited about the Department of Education. It's a new look Study Assist website. So we've had studyassist.gov.au for quite a while. But we've just recently done a redesign. And as part of that, we spoke to lots of students. And these were current students looking to go to uni. And so we've really tried to make the website something that will be really helpful for them and easy to navigate. So it's got all the information that you'd need, from understanding the basics of studying through to applying for a help loan, and then how to manage your help loan repayment. So we've got on there an eligibility tool, which is really useful. So one of the things when we talked about eligibility before, even though the criteria is in legislation, it's up to each university to assess whether you're eligible. But one of the things you can do is to go onto the Study Assist website and put in some key information around your circumstances, and it will spit out some results to let you know whether or not you're likely to be eligible. So that's a really useful tool. We've got lots of kind of quick links and popular topics. We've got some related topics at the bottom. So if you're on a page and you've just read about indexation and then you think, well, what else do I need to know about this? We kind of help signpost or give you a bit of a path for other bits of information that are useful. We've got FAQs on there. We've got these little things called tooltips. So as we were speaking about at the beginning, Rob, lots of the terminology in this space, there's lots of acronyms, CSP help. So what we've done with these tooltips is if you hover over the word, it'll pop up a little explanation for you, which will just allow you to understand what you're reading and then continue on your kind of journey. We've made some really great animated videos. So they're only sort of 60 seconds to 2 minutes, and they just go through some of the topics, particularly that we've spoken about today. So I'd really encourage listeners to go and have a look at those videos, and hopefully it will help them with their queries. We've also got a contact us form on there. So if all else fails and you've read all the material on there, you've watched the videos and you still have some questions, or you think this doesn't really, these aren't really my situation, I need some sort of clarification, you can jump on there and go to the contact us form, and then somebody from the Department of Education will have a look at your inquiry and then come back to you.
Yeah, I guess the other thing, it's a good thing to mention, the other thing in terms of support is, think about the other support services that might be out there for you. If you're currently in high school, your careers advisor will have been through this 8 bazillion times and can certainly provide you good guidance around that. And the universities themselves are also a good source of information. They have systems and processes set up to deal with these kind of inquiries. They obviously handle part of the entire process, so they're here also to support you. When do you think is the right time to go and have a look at the Study Assist website? Like, let's say you're going to be starting your studies in February or March next year. When's maybe the best time to jump on and start to explore this sort of topic?
Look, I think the study the basics is something that we would really encourage you to have a look at if you haven't started uni yet, or if you're, in year 12 and you're just trying to get a bit of an understanding of it. We understand that your focus is probably on finishing your exams, on, applying for the courses that interest you and seeing if you get an offer. And so you can jump in and out of the Study Assist website at any point. And because of the way we've kind of got the navigation across the top, there's some very specific headings about, starting study or looking at, loan application, what type of loans are there. I think depending on where you are in your study journey, there's a great entry point into Study Assist to get some more information.
The site's looking really nice. Full credit. It's been a really good redesign. It's very intuitive. Lots of different ways to access information, whether it's written pieces here or the videos and things like that. There is an easy way for you to consume the information. So get on there and get the info that you need. Nicole, it's been great having you on the podcast. One thing I might just quickly reference for people listening along, what we haven't talked about today, and that's because it sort of sits with another part of government, another whole part of your potential study experience, is around things like youth allowance, what we used to call Austudy actually still exists, but Austudy, scholarships from Australian institutions. So these other sorts of mechanisms which relate to the money, if you like, finance of higher education. We might try and take those on in a different podcast episode, but just to let you know that we deliberately haven't gone there today because they actually sit in a whole different other bucket. But hey, if you are listening along and you've got questions, you feel free to send them through to us. podcast@choosingyouruni.com. podcast@choosingyouruni.com. Always up to hear the sort of questions that you have and you'd like answered. Nicole, it's been wonderful connecting with you, and thanks for your generous time to help break this down for us. It's been really helpful.
Oh, thanks, Rob. I'm really grateful to be here, and if anyone's got any questions, have a look at the Study Assist website and get in touch with the department through that.
Wonderful. See you next time.
At Choosing Your Uni, our mission is to make finding your ideal institution and your degree fun, easy and stress-free. So if you're looking to save some time, to discover more and to get personalised advice for every step of your journey, check out choosingyouruni.com. Our theme music is composed by Pasha Shogi and his band Flow, and this episode has been researched and constructed on Gadigal land in Sydney. Until next time, have yourself an awesome day.